Today we're taking a look at the engineering, forges, and foundry rules, which are very, very important if you are playing an engineer or are just working with the engineering skill. It's also helpful as a GM to understand how these systems work, because this is sort of the backbone of how technology dominates the sector and why it can compete with Magic. So the rules were originally suggested by Kurt Forbes. It was a great idea. He came up with the concept of breaking it into forges and foundries. I had originally wanted to do one device, but I liked his idea better. So credit to you. Good job, Kurt. Anyway, one of Turnus's most potent weapons was invented not long after they settled the system. 3D printing technology was long in use, but it hadn't been codified in quite the same way that a company called Foundry and Forge did. And F&F, as they are known, became a financial powerhouse by basically selling these to everyone who could afford one. I mean, imagine not having access to a 3D printer and then suddenly having access to a 3D printer and a whole library of schematics that you can purchase. So you can build whatever you need to, from guns to ships to, anything that might be useful to your life in the sector. You can see why they became incredibly useful and highly sought after. The first part of the equation is the foundry itself. And the foundry digests materials. So basically it's a black box stamped with the silver logo that has the hammer and anvil that is iconic of F&F. And they range in size from a small Mark 1 all the way on up to a Mark 10. And it's 1 cubic meter per mark. So they can get really, really large up to a point where they really have to be stored in something like a warehouse or a starship. They come in all shapes and sizes. But even a small one is incredibly useful. Even a square meter can digest quite a few materials. And what you do is you feed the materials into the foundry. Nanites swarm it, they break it into its core components, and they store those components for further use. Those materials are then sent from a foundry to a forge, which is going to use those materials to make whatever it is you need to make. Different forges have different materials and access to different schematics, so they can make whatever those support. You need the right materials to obviously build a schematic that you have, and you have to have the schematic to begin with. To get one of these schematics, we'll see as we scroll on the page, artificers can make them, but you also can purchase them directly from F&F. They're happy to sell you schematics for anything under the stars. You can get anything from rifles to goggles to shares to starship repair parts to whatever you can imagine. They try to have a monopoly and sell it to you. And there is certainly a black market that goes around them that player characters often have access to and try to get access to just to circumvent them. But there's always kind of the Walmart option if you want to go to F&F and get something that you need. And you can see here the prices. And then we get down to schematics, and a bit about schematics. They are a huge part of the loot system because schematics have been around for forever. And if you are exploring, let's say, a dreadnought from 10,000 years before the present epoch, and you happen across a schematic for an incredible set of spell armor that's long since vanished from the sector, you can bring that back, manufacture it yourself, and start selling it, or just sell the schematic to somebody. Or if you see some technology that's really awesome and you happen to be an artificer, you can create your own schematic that encompasses some of the abilities that you saw in that technology. And the rules for doing that are contained on this page. You can see it takes them 8 hours of work per mark. So doing something like a Mark 5 is going to take them 40 hours of work over 5 days. And it's going to net in them creating something that's worth about 18,000 credits. They're usually only going to get 50% of the actual value if they're selling it directly. But this is a great way for engineers to make money. If you're an engineer and you actually have time to use your skill, of course you're going to make money. And that would translate to roughly 9,000 credits a week, which is really, really good, as it should be if you're an engineer. Anyway, the target rating is the difficulty threshold for the role, which means that if you have a really high dice pool, you might potentially be able to make like a Mark 7 something. It would still be difficult for you, but you could. So you really, through the course of a campaign are going to be building more and more cool stuff. And it is a pretty awesome class to play. The materials come in all shapes and forms. And one of the common questions we get is, can magical materials be put into a foundry? And the answer is yes. If you drop a void worm in, out comes powdered void scale. And that is very, very important because these magical materials can be consumed by mages to get spell pool. So if you liquefy, it is a little grisly, but if you liquefy a magical creature like a dragon, you can actually drink or consume that dragon in some form to get the magic on demand. So if you've got that handy in the form of, like, let's say potions, you distill this blood into potions, you can drink those on demand to get magic. So if you're at a pool, you just consume one of these and, hey, I've got some magic. And it's how mages prolong themselves in fights when they're starting to run dry. You can sort of buy your way into more magical power. And that's coming from putting these materials into a forge. So whenever the player characters kill someone, if you're lucky enough to have a captain as one of the characters in the crew, and that captain is a ship, that's an ideal place for you to place a forge and a foundry. And if you have those two things, then whenever you're dealing with something like, oh, we killed a worm, or we fought a drake, or a giant spider, or whatever it happens to be, you can distill that down into its core magical components and then go sell those. So it's a great way to get more money. Anyway, guys, that is the basic engineering system. The only last note I can think of is, as an engineer, if you want to make something, it is as simple as reverse engineering it. If you see somebody using something like, oh, that pistol is really cool, you can make a roll, you can make an attempt to do that, and you're just going to go ahead and try and succeed at it. You got a difficulty threshold based on the mark you're trying to create, and if you get enough, you can create this new formula that you wanted to create simply by having observed other things. Because that's how engineering works in real life. I mean, I was an engineer for many, many years before becoming an author. Anyway, hopefully these rules are useful. Let us know in the comments if everything is clear. If there are problems or things that are not clear, leave that also in the comments and we'll get it corrected as soon as possible. This video is kind of a placeholder. I will probably re-record it once you guys have pointed out the problems with it. Anyway, thank you for that feedback.